To help us understand a little bit more about the topic of youth and crime, we have invited Ari Goldkind to speak with us. Ari, thank you very much for being with us today.
Great to be with both of you today. Looking forward to this.
So, Ari, we understand it's not your first time here at Regent Park Focus, but why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a criminal lawyer, and I went to U of T Law School, where I see your shirt saying my alma mater. I graduated from law school and thought I would get into corporate law, which is what everybody thinks you're supposed to do after U of T. I was bored out of my mind and always interested in crime and law and punishment and all the favorite TV shows we all have, Law and Order, but I'm probably older than most people who watch that. And I thought, I'd like to be a criminal lawyer. So I went off and changed to be a criminal lawyer. I ran for mayor 3 years ago and spent a lot of time in this very building doing a podcast. And now I'm not only a criminal lawyer, but I'm a legal commentator for various networks across Canada on legal and political issues of the day, some of which I'm sure we're about to discuss.
That's awesome. We're excited to get started.
Great.
So what are some of the reasons you find that lead young people to commit crime?
Well, there are a lot of reasons. Some of them are legal reasons. Most of them, though, are reasons that are not talked about because they're much more difficult issues, hot button issues. What's your background? What community do you come from? Do you have parents? Do you have one parent or two? Do you have role models in your life? Do you have people that you look up to that you can actually aspire to be? Or are your heroes people that most of society would think is an unattainable goal? A sports star, a rapper, a pop star, or something like that. So one of the things we don't talk about that leads a lot of young people to crimes are, where are your roots? What are your aspirations? Who are you looking up to? Do you have a brother that works hard in the studies? Do you have a sister who's really doing well in school? Do you have parents that care about how you're doing? The legal system, which we'll get into, is sort of where all these questions end, but a lot of people in our society are afraid to ask the hard questions about how does a young person, a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, end up committing crimes, sometimes violent, while somebody like me doesn't. Those are questions that need to be asked, but they're also political, not just legal. But if you ask to your question, Olivia, why do people get into crime? It's not because of a legal system. It's because of a system in their homes, in their communities, that basically says what you do doesn't have consequences. It doesn't matter what you do. And I have a feeling you're going to ask me some of the questions about how is the youth criminal justice system set up? Are there consequences? This is an issue we should address.
Yeah. Another interesting point I'd just like to touch on, because we've discussed this in our criminology major at University of Toronto, is the influence of rappers and rap music. And there's been studies done on this which come out and claim that rap music actually does not lead to an increase in crime among youth. From your experience, would you say that's mistaken?
I don't believe that for one single solitary second. I think that's probably a study that's meant to have a result that, again, touches into politically correct issues. Do I think rap music makes people go out and be violent? Not necessarily. I mean, I love rap music. I listen to the same 93.5, 98.5 as anybody else. But in certain cultures or subcultures within it, where you have things being glorified, drugs, guns, money being how people look at each other and how they keep score, and if you're full of bling, you're a person of some value, but if you're just a modest person going through life, going to work, working 9 to 5, working minimum wage at McDonald's, you're sort of looked at as a loser versus somebody in these videos and images that we see as really successful. That sends to me a very dangerous message to young people, and no shock, those are the kind of young people that are often getting into big trouble in the youth criminal justice system, but not just in the youth criminal justice system. Once they turn 18, they're now entering more into the big boy world.
So Ari, if you don't mind, let's move on to, I guess, one of your favorite topics, which would be the justice system. To kind of begin off with this, I just want to ask you what you feel some of the biggest challenges are for youth as they navigate the criminal justice system.
Well, I would answer it in two ways. One of the biggest issues I always think is, do you have a good lawyer? Luckily, though it's never talked about, most young people who get into trouble in Canada or Ontario have access to legal aid, and that means they can get a lawyer paid for. And it's different than the States, where many people thinking there's a public defender system and the lawyers aren't good. Here, you get your lawyers of choice. All the top lawyers take legal aids. But the first thing is, have a good lawyer who understands the youth criminal justice system. The second part of that answer is, what kind of crime are they charged with? If they're charged with something that's sort of a silly, youthful mistake, that's a difficult thing as a youth, because you don't want what you did that was stupid or a mistake to come back to bite you in the behind down the road. For somebody who's a more serious, violent criminal as a youth, we can talk about that. That's a different fish.
So if we were to talk about someone who is a more serious, violent offender, what are their main challenges?
Well, the problem is that I don't think they have a lot. The youth criminal justice system, in my view, is a complete joke when it comes to young people who are violent, who hurt other people, or who hurt animals purposefully, people that are nasty, mean criminals. The youth criminal justice system, or as I call it, the criminal injustice system, sort of turns a blind eye and gives young people a pass and says, well, you're 16 or 17, so we're going to give you a get out of jail free card. The way the system is set up is that you look for the least restrictive things possible. So my beef with the criminal injustice system is that if you're doing something very violent, even in the context of a gang or a shooting or a stabbing or a beating, you're going to get a slap in the wrist from the system I work in. That's a problem. Where the system is really, really good for young people is when somebody does a youthful mistake, something that you would only do as a young person. You don't have malice or hate in your heart or a lot of evil or violence. Then the system does let you go on in your life without this being a black mark. But if you don't treat violence seriously and you say to a young person, you get a get out of jail free card, no matter how bad the things you do are, I'm not so sure that's a system that the public would respect.
So in your opinion, the youth criminal justice system in particular needs to be a bit more harsh in sentencing?
Much more harsh in sentencing, and also reflecting something interesting, which is, in our day and age, a 15 or a 16 or a 17-year-old is not a child anymore. We don't live in that time. If you're old enough to drive a car, 16. If you're old enough to have sex, the age of consent is 16. Why is it that if you're 16 years old in a month, and your friend or somebody that you're in a fight with who's 16 years old at your school, or you're 21, but somebody who's 16, beats the holy crap out of you and does it for all the reasons that they have? They're just mad at you and they know it's wrong. Why are they just getting a slap on the wrist, getting told, don't do it again, bad boy, don't hurt a deal? That to me sends a very, very bad message that we don't take violence seriously. And there's a big difference, in my view, and I'm in this system every day, between a very horrific crime of violence and a young person maybe stealing a disc from an HMV. HMV stores don't exist anymore, but you have my point.
So from your perspective, there shouldn't be a difference between the regular criminal justice system and the youth criminal justice system? You think that it should just be one combined system?
No, there should be a difference. Where the difference should be is it a crime of violence that really hurts another human being. And the age shouldn't be 18. To me, it should be 16. It goes back to my point. If you're old enough to have all the responsibilities that come with having sex, birth control, respect for women, consent, all of those other issues that go with the adult decision to have sex. Let's not pretend that's a childish decision. Or getting behind the wheel of a car, and a car in the wrong hands is a deadly weapon. Why the youth criminal justice system says that if you're between 16 and 18, you still get a slap on the wrist. If, God forbid, a 15-year-old or 16-year-old punches you in the face, that to me is a joke. We need to have a different discussion in this day and age that says, 16 really should be the marker. And if it's not violent, I'm all for dispositions. Dispositions means results that don't really hurt somebody or allow somebody to make amends. Write a letter of apology, do some community service, go volunteer at Meals and Wheels. But if you're committing violence, what message are we sending to a teenager who should know better, other than this is okay and you get a free pass because you're lucky enough to not have hit your 18th birthday?
So let's say we don't just give them a slap on the wrist. We change it up. We change the punishment up and make it a bit more severe. Do you think like prison would be the right way for that to go, or should it go more into like restorative justice, as you're saying? Maybe have them do more community service and get them involved.
Why don't you explain to people who don't know what restorative justice is, what it means, because otherwise people would be sitting going, I have no idea what Adil just said.
Restorative justice is essentially just a different way to penalize without feeling the penalty as much, I would say.
Well, what it does is it also tries to restore, the word restorative means to restore people back to where they were. In Aboriginal culture, there's sort of groups you get together. For example, let's say a 16-year-old did something wrong but really felt bad about it. Rather than having it march its way through courts and paying my fees and legal fees and judges, get everybody in a room where if the person who did wrong really feels bad about what they did, it haunts them. They feel guilty. That suggests that that's a person who is capable of remorse, able for the system to say, you might not be back and be Mr. Goldkind's best client. That's when restorative justice really comes into play. But if you're a young person and you don't want to plead guilty and you don't want to apologize and you go to trial and a judge finds that you did some really violent act, and at the end of it, the system is set up that you still do not go into jail or even a closed facility. In youth criminal justice, there are closed facilities where it's not an adult jail, it's a youth facility. They're not picnics, they're not great. But if there aren't consequences to what anybody does, and I don't just mean in crime, if you don't study for a test, you shouldn't get an A. If the system is set up that even if you don't study, you get an A, that system isn't going to work. That's the way the youth criminal justice system is set up. Well, I'm sure you both get straight A's, but the way the system is set up now is that no matter what you do, unless you go do something heinous like murder, but even if you're a 17 3/4-year-old murderer, you're going to be out of jail in 3 to 7 to 5 years, depending on certain math, which I won't bore you with. But as a 17-year-old in 3/4, you've taken a life. What kind of punishment is that?
Yeah.
I'm not saying you should agree with me. That's just my view.
We definitely see your point in terms of like violent offenders should be treated a little bit differently than your regular like walk into a store and steal like a candy bar from Dollarama type of offender. My question to that though is, so once you put someone into the criminal justice system, that stigma kind of carries over for the rest of their life. It can impede, say, job opportunities, employment opportunities. It can impede how they get loans from the bank and things like that. So it kind of slows down their life, and then oftentimes what you see is a cycle of crime that they get stuck in.
So let me explain why I disagree with you. Because you're absolutely right if it's somebody who's 18 that gets charged. But the way the YCJA, the Youth Criminal Justice System, works is that if you're a youth, nobody will ever know. Once you turn 18 and apply to school, apply to work, get on a plane, that sort of thing, nobody will ever know, because one of the tightest rules of the YCJA is that your records are sealed. And when I say sealed, I mean sealed. So all the things that you said, which are absolutely right, if you get charged with a theft under at 18, or you pushed your girlfriend or pushed your boyfriend, that's going to stay with you, and it can turn into a cycle and a cycle. But in the youth criminal justice system, one of the parts that a lot of people like about it is that if you get into trouble as a young person, it will not come back to be used against you over and over by cops, or let's leave cops out of it, employers, U of T, knowing that you were arrested when you're 14. I don't think a lot of people know that, but behind the scenes, that's the rationale of a lot of rules in the YCJA. And many people would know, if you ever look on TV at a case, we don't identify the young person charged, their faces blacked out, we don't use their real name, it'll say JS or something like that. It's because the idea is we don't want to screw up a young person's life who made a youthful mistake. That part, the philosophy, to me, I understand.
Right. So I guess some of the assumptions that the criminal justice system works with, that we have been talking about already, is that young people either they don't have support at home, which we have already mentioned, or they're young, we recognize that they're not thinking straight, perhaps they're childish, etc., etc. So if a young boy is carrying a gun, shouldn't we be asking about what is happening in the home?
We should be, but you're going to get into a lot of people being offended or upset or thinking you're getting into racial issues or cultural issues or religious issues. But if we don't get into those issues, how do you ever solve a problem if you're not willing to discuss any part of it openly rather than just coming up with some solution that means nothing or is an empty cliche? So many people who come through the youth criminal justice system have no supports. They have no aspirations at home. They have nobody that sets down rules the way you think a court system would with rules. At home, they are rewarded for bad behavior. If you're rewarded for bad behavior, what are you likely to keep doing?
Yeah, the same thing.
The same things.
So really quickly, I guess, if you're a young person and you find yourself in a situation where you have committed a crime and you need help, what should you do?
At court, in the courthouses, there are a lot of support systems set up. There are youth probation workers, there are youth mental health workers, there are youth bail workers. And if you're a young person and you have made a mistake, one of the most important things you can do in the eyes of the court is own up to it. Try and get some insight into why you did it, where it comes from, what's happening at home. So if you're able to have that insight and to apologize and to feel remorse, the youth criminal justice system will tend to treat you in a very fair way, and by fair I mean very not severely.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Dale, do you have any
thank you for
comments?
coming out today.
My
and
pleasure.
It was our pleasure to speak to you. And to our viewers, we hope you enjoyed our Ari Goldkind, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.